Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to direct your attention to the screens in front of you.
General Electric, here is Ronald Reagan.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
For over 8 years, a popular actor named Ronald Reagan hosted a TV program called GE Theater.
Well, that's part of living better electrically.
During that time, he also spent 10 weeks each year traveling the country, speaking to GE employees in more than 130 factories, sharing a message of optimism and a belief in the power of innovation and entrepreneurial spirit.
America's best days and democracy's best days lie ahead.
So now, GE is deeply honored to serve as presenting sponsor of the Ronald Reagan Centennial Celebration. Because long before he changed the world,
tear down this wall,
or led a nation,
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear,
or governed a state,
you and I have a rendezvous with destiny.
He inspired our company.
For General Electric, here is Ronald Reagan.
Good evening. For those of you I've not yet had the chance to meet, my name is John Hybush. I am the Executive Director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you here this evening. Before I introduce our special guest this evening, I ask you to please turn off any cell phone or pager you might have. We would really greatly appreciate that. And after I introduce Mrs. Reagan and her guests, if you would please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to introduce the former First Lady of the United States, Nancy Reagan, escorted by Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger and Mr. Jeffrey Immelt, Chairman and CEO of General Electric. Now, in honor of our men and women in uniform who defend our freedom around the world, please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. Before we get started, there are several special guests in the audience I would like to recognize this evening. First, please welcome the Governor of the great state of California, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. We are also honored to have a number of our foundation trustees here with us this evening. Please welcome former Secretary of State George Shultz. Former United States Solicitor General Ted Olson. The former mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani. Mr. Brad Freeman. Mr. Terry Lanny and Mrs. Deborah Lanny. Mr. Boone Pickens and Mrs. Madeline Pickens. And Mr. Jerry Parsky and Mrs. Robin Parsky. We are also pleased to have with us tonight John Harrington, the former Secretary of Energy. Mr. Ted Craver, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Edison International, and his wife, Marion. And Mrs. Janice Gallegly, the wife of Congressman Elton Gallegly. Just a few hundred feet away from here, we are proud to have something we call the Discovery Center. Perhaps some of you have had a chance to see it. It is a marvelous, realistic recreation of the Oval Office, a command center aboard an aircraft carrier, the White House press room, and a mock-up of Air Force One. While this unique learning center is truly impressive, what's more impressive to us at the library is the imagination and wonder that the students, now 45,000 strong, exhibit when they have a chance to learn inside these rooms. While there, they're invited to role play as President Reagan, his cabinet, top military officials, and the media, and we challenge them to think their way out of some tight corners in tense, deadline-filled decision-making scenarios. It is a world-class lesson in civics and leadership. Now, for a moment, I'd like to ask all of you to put yourselves in a similar role-playing exercise. Imagine that tomorrow you wake up as the leader of the 6th largest company in the world. You've just taken the reins of this giant company from men considered giants themselves, starting with Thomas Edison 134 years ago. You have very large shoes to fill. You're now responsible for the welfare of almost 500,000 employees and retirees around the world. That is about the size of the United States Army. You have millions of shareholders to satisfy, 4 million to be exact. Expectations are high. You sit atop a conglomerate that represents one of the broadest arrays of products and services of any company in existence, from aircraft engines to life-saving medical devices to solar power, to light bulbs, commercial lending, and many dozens of challenging and competitive businesses in between. Finally, your success as CEO will have a direct and lasting impact on the economy of the United States, as your company is the largest exporter of any enterprise in America. Now, imagine, if you will, you've gotten through your first day on the job, and 12 hours later, as the CEO of one of the most globally diversified companies on the planet, you wake up to 9/11. Reset, everything changes. Welcome to the world of our guest tonight, Mr. Jeffrey Immelt. From Jeff's challenging beginning as GE's chairman and CEO on the heels of 9/11, all the way through the worst financial crisis and recession our nation has seen since the Great Depression, it is a certainty that this past decade and these challenging times have minted a leader and a visionary in Jeff Immelt that both GE and America are fortunate to have. But do not take my word for it. Since he took the helm at GE almost 10 years ago, Jeff has been named by Barron's as one of the world's best CEOs 3 times. As for the company he leads, GE has been named by Fortune magazine readers as America's most admired company. Now, how does he do it? And by inference, how does GE do it? I am not completely sure, but I know the reason lies way beyond his smarts. Yes, he has a degree in applied mathematics from Dartmouth and an MBA from Harvard. But I believe the fundamental reason Jeff is such a success is rather simple. He has made leadership a lifelong study. He has analyzed it, observed it, thought about it, written about it, and quite fortunately for GE, practiced it for many years. Now, one of the leaders he has most studied and most admired was a man by the name of Ronald Reagan. I will leave it to Jeff to talk to you about his views on President Reagan's leadership and how that leadership changed America and the world forever. But before I turn the podium over to Jeff, on behalf of Mrs. Reagan and our entire Board of Trustees at the Reagan Foundation, I just want to say thank you to Jeff and his team at GE for their generosity and indeed their leadership for making a very special announcement today. As many of you know, not a dime of taxpayer funds will be going to support the year-long celebration of our 40th president's 100th birthday. This is exactly as President Reagan would have it. And this is why it is so helpful and so extraordinary to announce today that GE is stepping forward to become the presenting sponsor of the upcoming Reagan Centennial and donating $15 million in support of this historic effort. It is a gift like this from one of America's finest companies in support of one of America's finest presidents that will go a long way to celebrating the Reagan Centennial. And importantly, a third of this contribution, $5 million, will provide enough funds to create the GE Reagan Scholars Program, one that in the next 10 years will put hundreds of deserving and imaginative young students, ones like Ronald Reagan, through college. These are remarkable gifts from a remarkable company led by a remarkable man. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Chairman and CEO of General Electric, Mr. Jeffrey Immelt.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. Thank you. Please. Thank you very much. Thank you. Please. The stock price isn't good enough to get that kind of applause. So, first a story about the tie. I was with Secretary Shultz this afternoon at Long Beach. We had a symposium with 500 customers. I was wearing a red tie. And Secretary Shultz said to me, "How dare you come to Ronald Reagan's centennial, Irishman, on St. Patrick's Day wearing a red tie?" So I went to a customer and paid him $20 for his tie, and I'm now wearing his tie. I think he may have been a true story. I think he may have been an aircraft engines customer, so I hope he didn't get a free aircraft engine in there as well. But I want to thank Mrs. Reagan for her kind hospitality and hosting all of us here this evening. And I'm going to speak tonight about your husband, but it's no secret that his accomplishments wouldn't have been possible without your support. So thank you, Mrs. Reagan, and it is a great honor of my life to be here with you this afternoon. And I had the great pleasure to interview Secretary Shultz this afternoon in Long Beach in front of about 600 GE employees and customers to talk about President Reagan, and it is just such an honor to watch such a great American as Secretary Shultz, and it's an honor for me to be here with you tonight as well, Secretary. It's really great. On February 6, 2011, the nation will celebrate the centennial of a great president, one of my personal heroes, and that's Ronald Reagan. As John said, we're proud to have announced today that GE, in association with the Reagan Presidential Foundation, will serve as the presenting sponsor of the centennial and lead towards the celebration of his 100th birthday in 2011. And I want you to know, Mrs. Reagan, and to all the board members here today, we're excited about the celebration. We'll make you proud of what we do, and we will do a good job for you in this effort. When people ask me to describe GE, I tell them we're an optimistic, tough-minded, confident growth company, and a company that survived for 130 years because we know how to solve the world's toughest problems. In many ways, we could have learned that from Ronald Reagan. In the summer of 1954, Ronald Reagan, the broadcasting star and renowned head of the Screen Actors Guild, started a new phase in his career, and that is he went to work at GE. From 1954 to 1962, Ronald Reagan served as the host of the General Electric Theater, a drama series that aired on Sunday nights on CBS. Soon, when the renovation of the museum is complete, you're going to be able to visit the GE Theater itself. And with NBC Universal, we've refurbished all 208 episodes And so it's going to be an interactive display that people walking through the museum are going to be able to watch. Back in 1954, GE was having a hard time deciding who would serve as the public face of the company, and our lead communicator was a guy named Earl Dunkel. And he said we weren't just looking for somebody people knew who had the skills of a salesman and a showman. They were looking for someone who could do more than entertain people, but inspire them, and someone who possessed the quality of character called, what he said, moral fiber. His platform was the General Electric Theater, and it was interesting. It featured Hollywood's biggest stars, but in a made-for-TV format. And its allure was the original design as a program that would allow stars to play any role they liked. And the programming and the project flowed from there. It was great television and a great match for GE and Ronald Reagan. And Mr. Reagan, you might remember in 1954, one of the benefits of the job was a beautiful, well-equipped kitchen with GE appliances. So we had a great association from the start. But in the course of history, what President Reagan started in those years was his political and professional transformation. From Democrat to Republican, and from an entertainer to a champion of freedom, and eventually the leader of the free world. Our slogan in the 1950s was "Progress is our most important product," and it was a time of great progress and possibilities for the country, which Mr. Reagan experienced in his second role at GE at the time as the employee ambassador. He traveled the breadth of the country, riding trains to visit GE plants, speaking hundreds of times to tens of thousands of workers. He'd start at dawn and wouldn't get to his hotel until after midnight, and then he'd do it over again day after day after day. My father, Joe Immelt, worked at GE for 40 years, from 1948 to 1988 in Cincinnati, Ohio. And Mr. Reagan visited this facility several times during his tours and made a great impression on all of the workers, including my father. Mr. Reagan walked every assembly line at GE, every single assembly line. He had lunch with employees in the cafeteria. This is actually Flat Rock, North Carolina, lighting plant. And he walked hundreds of lines just like that. He hit the Rotary Clubs, the Chamber of Commerce, the Kiwanis, and the Elks. And at the time, my predecessor, a man named Ralph Cordner, told Mr. Reagan, "I'm not going to censor anything you say. You're speaking for yourself, so say what you believe." And so he did, writing and delivering the message that would have eventually become known as the speech, his testament of faith and the virtues and abilities of free people in the great country they'd built. In 1964, he gave a famous version of that speech before a national audience on behalf of presidential candidate Barry Goldwater, and began one of the most successful American political careers of the 20th century. GE saw his roving ambassadorship as a way to engage its workforce, and what President Reagan would say in his memoirs is that he saw it as an education. He later said that the GE tours became a postgraduate course in political science, and by 1960, he felt he had completed the process of self-conversion. Now, it was a political conversion, of course. In the early 1950s, Ronald Reagan was still a registered Democrat. But it was also a conversion to a life of public service, the beginning of a journey that would culminate in his presidency, and a chapter of American history that will always be remembered as the Reagan era. In 1980, America was experiencing something that Ronald Reagan knew was not natural to the American character: a crisis of self-doubt, shrouded in the lingering shadows of Vietnam and Watergate, suffering from stagflation, an energy crisis, the outrage of U.S. hostages in Iran, and worried as our Cold War enemies went on the offensive. And the election of Ronald Reagan changed all that. His many accomplishments at home and abroad made his presidency one of the most successful of our time. But his most important presidential achievement cannot be attributed to the effect of his policies alone, but to the strength of his faith in his country and its ideals, the faith in which his policies were conceived, the faith which he communicated to his fellow Americans by word and deed and inspiration. Ronald Reagan's greatest achievement was to encourage Americans to believe in ourselves again. When he worked for GE and talked to thousands of our employees, he heard from them individual stories of how bright and hard-working people could create their own success. Those lessons, too, became articles of faith for a man that didn't believe in walls, either economic or political. He believed in the genius and industry of Americans, and he knew that freer Americans were to make their own decisions, to act in their own interest, to pursue their dreams, the greater would be their contribution to the country's progress. In January of 1980, the U.S. economy entered one of the deepest recessions in the nation's history. Inflation had grown, and interest rates and unemployment were soaring. In his February address before the Congress, President Reagan laid out a plan to prevent inflation and the growing tax burden from putting an end to everything we believe in and our dreams for the future. His plan produced real change, and the results were profound. And by the end of Reagan's first term, inflation had fallen by more than 2/3, unemployment had eased, productivity had expanded, and our economy was growing again. As a young man, I watched each move and saw the positive effect they had on business. I was attracted to his optimism and confidence. Now, that was something that a 24-year-old with $60,000 in student loans could identify with. I joined GE in 1982, at the same time President Reagan was rejuvenating our economy. And over the last 3 decades, GE has followed a path of optimism and growth. We've earned since that time about $265 billion in profit and generated about $300 billion in cash. And we've become one of the world's most competitive companies, and we've come through the recent crisis very confident in our future. But the world's changed dramatically since the 1980s, and again, we find ourselves at a turning point. There are new global economic forces in China and India, and we're confronting new terrorist threats around the world. High and volatile energy prices threaten our national security. Our country is grappling with large social problems like affordable health care. Wall Street, long a global symbol of successful capitalism, has been blamed for the largest economic crisis since the Depression. And our future competitiveness is threatened by problems in our public education system and a growing national debt. There you go again. Over the years, I've given several commencement addresses, and I always remind college seniors that in America, the next generation must be the greatest generation. The future must be better than the past. What's never changed in this country is the resilience of the people, the ability to overcome adversity, learn from their mistakes, and build their opportunities, more prosperous lives, and a better country. That's the kind of leadership that's timeless, and its essence is captured in the words that I think describe our 40th president: optimistic, confident, tough-minded, growth-oriented, a leader. Our times demand of us in government and business that kind of leadership that takes inspiration from the values and achievements of Americans. And having just navigated through this terrible economic turmoil, it would be crazy for any leader to hunker down and refuse to make tough decisions and run from the future. Rather, let's follow the vision and the example set by President Reagan. First, optimism. Only optimists invest and create jobs. With 10% unemployment, we need more optimism. It's important that we make technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship the cornerstone of a 21st century America. Companies, big and small, need to invest more in research and development, and our leadership in emerging sciences has to be reestablished. To support this effort, we need a new generation of American engineers. The wealth of any country depends on science. And to achieve this, education, particularly K through 12 in this country, must be strengthened to allow our children to compete. GE wants to help lead this effort. We're investing about 5% of our revenue back into research and development, more than any time in our history. We have more than 40,000 engineers and have filed more than 20,000 patents in this decade alone. In addition to our own efforts, we've partnered with hundreds of thousands of small businesses and suppliers, working to make them successful as well. This year, we're going to launch a brand new commercial jet engine, the most energy efficient in the world. We invested $1 billion to put this one engine on its first plane. We did it through 2 recessions. And now we're positioned to sell this product from Saudi Arabia to China to India, every place in the world. And we'll be rewarded. But only because we're optimists, only because we believe that the future will be better than the past. Built on this foundation of optimism, President Reagan had a sense of confidence that American free enterprise can compete in every corner of the world. In President Reagan's time, America was the world's largest exporter by far. Today, we're 4th. Within the next few years, China could pass us in total manufacturing output. We can only reverse this trend by investing in great products and selling them competitively in every corner of the world. Customers and governments around the world like doing business with American companies. They respect our innovation. More important than that, they respect our values. And there will be 1 billion new middle-class consumers in the emerging world in the next 10 years, 1 billion. And American renewal can be fueled by entrepreneurship that's growing around the world. I grew up in Ohio, and I had never left the United States until I went to work at GE. And recently, I've spent a lot of time in Africa, where in 2010, we will sell more than $5 billion of products. Global capitalism is a great way to spread prosperity. It's important that American companies are leading in places like Africa, developing countries that will grow and where people want to experience personal growth and freedom. But it takes confidence. GE will lead the U.S. efforts to double exports over the next 5 years. We're a $20 billion exporter, and we sell in 120 countries. And by working hard, we're convinced that American business can win anywhere in the world. President Reagan was determined. I think what sometimes people mistake is people that are optimists and can still be tough-minded and can still execute. This was a president that had the ideas, but also knew how to execute. And today we've got to be realistic about our problems and tough-minded about finding and implementing solutions. We've got to be the country that the world looks to as problem solvers, not problem creators. And it's time for this generation, my generation, to accept the responsibility of every American generation, to create a more prosperous America than we inherited by solving problems that became acute during our watch. The deficit, affordable health care, energy security. People are willing to follow an aspirational vision for problem solving. For instance, I'm convinced that we can solve our need for energy security and lead energy innovation in the next decade. We can get this done by 2020. And I've worked a lot with Boone and with the governor here on ideas to help make that happen. The U.S. can lead this energy renaissance. We should rebuild our nuclear power infrastructure, be a leader in natural gas, exploration and usage, find ways to produce energy with clean coal, deliver the next generation of renewable technologies and the next generation of transportation technologies using hybrids. But leadership in energy will ensure our global competitiveness, our global security, and create jobs at the same time, and we can do this. Similarly, the challenges of affordable health care and our budget deficit must be addressed. And while the government may lead in these efforts, it's important that private enterprise leads a constructive voice. In health care and the deficit, for that matter, I know that innovation and market incentives will be required to improve cost, quality, and access. We are a resourceful, problem-solving people, and I'm confident that we can overcome our challenges if America's leaders have the will to act and determination to succeed. President Reagan had a passion for growth, driven by private enterprise but shared by all. A vibrant economy can cure most of society's problems today. President Reagan was a very popular figure on the GE factory floor. He listened to our workers and he understood them. He understood their problems, and most of all, he believed in their dreams. All of our workers should have an important stake as we grow our company around the world. Today at GE, we're reinvesting back into our manufacturing capability. We want to demonstrate to our own people that they can make things and compete anywhere in the world. It's a way for us to be more competitive, but it's also a way to reinvigorate a middle class in this country. Our workers won't settle for learning how to live with fear. They want to live their dreams. And they don't want to be consoled, they want to be encouraged. Earlier this week, I visited our facility in Erie, Pennsylvania, one of Ronald Reagan's most frequent stops. This is a 100-year-old factory where we make locomotives. This plant has been hit incredibly hard by the recession. Yet we've increased our investment in technology. And we're going to exit the recession 2 generations of technology ahead of our competition. And we're aggressively selling our products made in Erie, Pennsylvania, in every corner of the world, from Kazakhstan to South Africa. Growth requires hard work. Nothing's going to be given to us. We have tougher competitors around the world today than we ever have. But we need a long-term view. And some investments, like those in infrastructure and education, are required to restore our national competitiveness. Lastly, Ronald Reagan was the manifestation of persistence, personal accountability, and leadership. Let's face it, leadership has been severely criticized as we've come through the economic crisis. The future is about building bigger and diverse teams that can accomplish tough missions while retaining a culture of respect. We're committed to renewing that kind of leadership inside GE. We're developing better listeners, people that know how to execute with speed and competency. We're exciting people with big ideas, but matched with definitive actions and accountability. And we plan to bring everyone with us. We believe that successful leaders can be tough-minded and competitive while remaining respectful and humble. Today, people in this country are angry, but anger is not leadership. I know that GE can make a difference to the American economy, and by the example we set. We want to be a company that understands not just where we fit in the capital markets, not just in the commercial markets, but also in a broader society. And again, we learned that from Ronald Reagan. In every initiative he undertook, every legislative debate, every negotiation and discussion, he remained a model of courtesy and civility, as well as determination. Even his Democratic successors publicly acknowledged his welcome and tempering influence on political discourse, an influence we could surely benefit from today. He knew however deeply we felt and strongly argued our differences were, we had something important in common. We were all Americans. So this is what I tell my GE colleagues in this moment, March of 2010. If you go to bed each night confident that tomorrow you're going to get another chance to make the best of your talents, and you're going to get a chance to make your business and your job better, you're going to wake up happy and productive. If you go to bed pining away for the past, 2005, 1995, you're destined for unhappiness. I vote for being happy. We're in a new day, a new normal, and we want our people to be motivated by that. I'm not saying memories aren't important, they can show us the path ahead. But optimism, hope, faith, and self-confidence are the qualities that will get us there. And those are qualities that President Reagan evoked when he summoned us to our appointment with history. Today, those qualities of tough-minded optimism and confidence will help our country continue on its path of renewal. And like President Reagan, we must believe in ourselves and take courage from our ideals and stand tall. And we want to help with this effort in this centennial year, and will. The $5 million contribution for the G. Reagan Scholarship Fund will support high school seniors whose industry, initiative, and achievements recall the qualities of the self-made man who became the 40th President of the United States. Reagan scholars will have proven inside and outside the classroom, as Ronald Reagan did, a dedicated work ethic, respect for the values and responsibilities of free people, a determination to succeed, and the promise of leadership in the professions they eventually enter. We hope many of them will become leaders in occupations that are critical to the future success of our country, and we're confident that some of them, anyhow, will become GE employees. 1954 to 1962 were special years at GE. According to his memoirs, President Reagan considered his time at GE the second most important 8-year job he ever had. GE is honored by the association, but I suspect that we learned more from him than he learned from us. And the most important thing President Reagan taught all Americans is that in this great country, you can succeed as many times as you have the courage and initiative to try. You know, GE in every way is a global company. 60% of our revenues are outside the United States, and we're determined to achieve even greater global growth in the future. But we can't at the same time invest in the competitiveness of this country and its workers. A competitive country, a competitive United States is a confident country, and a confident America plays an important role in global prosperity. Ronald Reagan set an example for the country. He certainly set an example for young people like me that were able to watch his leadership. And I try to manage my life and my company to do the same. Always listen, always try to learn, always try to improve, stay humble, make those around you better, and appreciate your responsibility to perform with integrity and make things better. Nearly 60 years after GE and Ronald Reagan first worked together, we're honored to renew this association. I'm very proud GE can play a small role in celebrating the extraordinary life, character, and service and legacy of Ronald Reagan. And may I add that GE still believes that progress is our most important product. No business created and operating in the country should ever believe in anything less, and should we forget it, we have the example of the great man to whom we pay tribute to today to recall us to our senses and our obligations. Thank you for your attention, and since this is a lecture, I'm now happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. As Jeff has said, he's been gracious enough to give us a few minutes to answer questions. If you have a question, if you could please raise your hand. We have staff in the aisles with a microphone. If you could just do us a favor and wait till you get the microphone in your hand, it would be greatly appreciated. We have one right here.
My name is Robert Fisher, and in 1945, the summer, I worked at the GE supercharger plant in Fort Wayne, Indiana. My dad worked at the GE there for 33 years. My wife's father worked at the GE in Fort Wayne for about 20 years. 30 years. And when my wife's parents passed away, they gave her some GE stock, which we still have. And my question is...
Here we go. You have it at a good
Not that it
basis.
dropped to the
Yeah,
50%.
you have it at a good basis, so.
Also, we have a son that's going to graduate or retire from the Navy in 30 years. But my real question is, we had two grandchildren that graduated from a small Christian college in Florida, Tampa, Florida. And we've learned that GE, which you are admired by America and even the world, withdrew a support of this college. My question is, why?
I have to give you an honest answer. I have no idea. So, but I'll have one of my colleagues meet with you afterwards and try to see what happened there. Anybody have an easier question than that?
A question right over here to our right. Over here to your right, Jeff.
My name is Sheila Ilton. I have the pleasure of being a docent here, and I thank Mrs. Reagan for setting that up for all of us. We delight in it, every one of us. My question is, sir, if you happen to be debating the health care bill, what would you do and what would you say?
Oh, boy. I'd give that over to Secretary Schultz and see. So healthcare in this country needs to be reformed. So this is a problem that is worth working on. It is unless we can do something to rein in the cost of healthcare, it's not only going to impact the lives affected, but it's also going to have a debilitating impact on the budget. The bill as it stands today that will be voted on possibly this week is mainly about access. It mainly increases the number of people that are covered. That, you know, doesn't seem like a bad goal, and that's something that I think it primarily does. The question is, what do we do the day after the healthcare debate? Because the likelihood is that we're going to wake up 5 years from now, and the percentage of healthcare of the GDP is going to be higher, not lower. We will have done nothing to rein in the cost. There's no such thing as national health care in this country. It's done city by city, town by town. One of the things we're trying to do in a big GE town in Cincinnati, Ohio, is band together with other employers. We're trying to work on prevention, education, communication with our own employees. We're trying to take our industrial leaders and put them in the healthcare setting to see how we can improve cost, quality, and access in the healthcare setting. We're going to implement healthcare information technology. We're going to try to bring small businesses into the town and be able to buy alongside with big businesses in town. And we think if we do that in one town in a model effort, we can maybe get the inflation from 9% down to 5%. But that's healthcare reform. Healthcare reform is about real people working together to improve quality and lower cost. It can be done with 100 experiments around this country with incentives to do it. And until we're really willing to attack the real systemic issues around healthcare, everything else is just a conversation. So I'm quite keen on it. I think it's something businesses can do a better job of. And for me, we've got about 650,000 covered lives between our employees and retirees. We spend about $3 billion a year on healthcare. It's growing 9% a year over the last 25 years. If that trajectory continues, there just won't be jobs in this country that are competitive on a global basis. We can't let that happen. So my answer to you is kind of, to say it's almost indecipherable what's going to happen this week. The real question is what happens next week, whether it passes or fails. We've got to get about reforming healthcare delivery, and that's going to be a local effort. And I can tell you GE will be at the lead of that. We'll be at the lead of that.
Question right over here in the middle. And you can pass that down. Thank you.
let me see if I can bring the questions a little closer to what GE represents. In our efforts to bring energy more into the clean environment there are some utilities, specifically the city of Los Angeles has a utility which has 44% coal, and in their effort to change that mix, what can GE do without increasing the cost of providing that change in infrastructure for the ratepayers? What can GE do as a public-private partnership, especially since the city of Los Angeles specifically is going through what other small cities are going through, as well as large cities in terms of the economic crisis?
These are really hard questions, I have to say. I thought, John, this would be easier tonight, but since
I'll take the next one.
Look, energy is it's about cost. It's about security. It's about job creation. There's a lot of things that are involved in energy policy. We believe that the country actually needs a strategy in energy. That whatever the price of oil is today can't be what our strategy is. And we've always endorsed a multi-fuel strategy because we're never going to be smart enough to figure out what's going to be the best. So we think nuclear has a role. We think natural gas has a role. We think clean coal has a role. We think renewables, wind and solar, battery technology, that these all have a role. The challenge is exactly the way you phrased it. In some places in this country, consumers don't pay what they should pay for electricity. And we've subsidized electricity on an old business model that doesn't really reflect the realities of what's going to be needed to reinvest in some of these new technologies. How many people in here believe in nuclear power? Almost everybody, right? There's 52 nuclear power plants being built. How many people would believe in nuclear power if your electricity bills went up? It's about 3 of you. You can only answer yes to the first one if you're willing to answer yes to the second one. And that's the destiny that we have to be on. And I just think not addressing it is irresponsible because every year you get further down the path. Now, we believe in what I call a clean energy standard. We believe that there should be emission standards. Whether you believe in global warming or not, I'm not going to convince you of that tonight. But we ought to set a clean energy standard that would favor gas and wind and nuclear and all the technologies that are there. Energy policy is quite important. The other thing, it can create jobs. There's going to be 10 million jobs created globally in clean energy over the next decade. It's important that the U.S. Gets ahead of that, and we trail we trail Europe and China in almost all of them. The one place I'd be remiss with Boone sitting here that is absolutely clear, this is a country that can lead in natural gas. This is a country that's got phenomenal reserves and technology around natural gas, and that in some ways should be a real emphasis as we go forward. But just when you're driving home tonight, just think 52 nuclear power plants being built around the world, 0 in the US, 0. It doesn't happen by accident. And that's what we have to worry about.
Okay, we have time for 2 more easier questions. Okay, here's an easy one here.
Good.
Thank you. I'm Linda Shackelford, and I also have the honor of being a docent here at the library. Thank you, Mrs. Reagan. My question has to do with the General Electric Reagan Scholarship. Is this going to be available for all seniors who are U.S. citizens?
So I'd give that one to John, probably, since you thought this was going to be. I mean, I'd say we're still formulating the approach, but.
Yes, it will. It's going to be a program that is national in scope. There's no question. And if you're a qualified high school senior, you will be eligible. You're going to have to meet a pretty high bar because it's going to be the bar that Ronald Reagan would have gotten over. But yeah, that will be the case. Way back here in the back.
I would tell you one story, just
please.
Again, something to think about. Our largest customer as a company in 2009 is the Saudi Electric Corporation in Riyadh. They're the biggest GE customer in 2009. They buy gas turbines from us. And when I go visit their leadership team to try to sell more that get exported from the U.S. into Saudi Arabia, their top 20 managers all went to college in the United States. There is a friendship, there's an association. They went all over the place. University of Wyoming, Oregon State, University of Illinois. But that time period they spent in this country has created a sense of goodwill and kinship that just can't be replaced. So I think there's a great role, and we should make the $5 million even more as time goes on, because I think the principles of this are quite strong. And in my sense, my conversation with John, we start with 5, but I'd be surprised if other people don't join in, and we have a multitude of this over time. And it should be for American students. But at the same time, the colleges in this country can aggregate really great people from around the world that help over the long term.
We have time for one last question right here in the
Okay,
back.
Paul Grossgold here. You mentioned that we're at 10% unemployment. I read an article in LA Times recently that said our returning war veterans are running about twice that much in the unemployment rate. And obviously, I think all of us would agree that's a national embarrassment. I wonder what you can tell us about what GE and other great American companies can do to turn that around. Thank you.
So we have 14,000 employees that are veterans inside the company. We're the second biggest employer of people coming back. We do a multitude of different programs. We have something called a junior officer leadership program, where we take people that are coming back and give them a specific management training program. We've worked with General Petraeus on wounded soldiers and ways that they can be integrated back into the workforce. And I would say not only is it the right thing to do, but these are terrific employees. Fantastic employees, and it's been a great program.
We're out of time for questions, but we have a tradition here for our very special guests. And on a very rare occasion, we provide them, Jeff, with a very rare gift. In your case, because GE has been so remarkably generous for the Reagan Centennial, we've got 2 gifts for you. The first, you need not unwrap it right here. I'll tell you what it is. It's a rare commodity. This is a copy of President Reagan's diaries, as signed by both President Reagan and Mrs. Reagan. There are very few of these in the world.
I'm so honored. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank
you. The second gift, and this is one that we hope you can proudly display in your office or anywhere you so choose. There are very few of these in the United States. Some of you might recall that in June of this past year, Mrs. Reagan traveled to Washington, D.C., and unveiled a very, very special object in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol. This object that we are about to unveil is a replica of the precise statue that sits in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol of President Ronald Reagan.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's great. Thank you. So, I'd like to take it home, but I think I better put it in the GE lobby.
Well, what I would say, it is remarkably heavy, and I think only Governor Schwarzenegger could pick this up. So we'll get some others to help you with that.
Good,
Thank
John.
you,
Thanks.
Thank you so much.